This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On October the 21st, the RCMI and the Naval Association of Canada held their annual joint Trafalgar Day Niobe Luncheon. This year's speaker was Dr. Adrian Schimnowski, Operations Director of the Arctic Research Foundation, who gave the gathering a fascinating update on the search for and recovery of the Franklin expedition of 1845 to 47.
Yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here. I've been eavesdropping. Maybe should I use the mic? Yeah. I've been eavesdropping on a lot of the conversations here, and I think it should be you up here telling the stories, because in this room I think there's so many years, many years of experience on the ocean, the sea, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I am the Operations Director for Arctic Research Foundation. That role is very broad. You'll often see me in the Arctic in June prepping the ship to get it ready for the field season. So I'll be under the engine with the engineers. I'll be repairing satellite communication systems. I will be coming up with new ways to build infrastructure in the Arctic. Recently we have new science labs that just arrived in Cambridge Bay, Inuit. These science labs are converted 20-foot sea containers that are powered by solar and wind energy that can be put in remote locations to support science. And this science could be archaeology, marine science, land-based science, even weather stations. So Arctic Research Foundation isn't just about the Franklin expedition. We're really about building knowledge in the Arctic, helping communities through art, culture, combining that with science and also history. The Franklin expeditions was a good way of jumping off into a larger realm. The way the Erebus looked in mid-August this year. So this is a photo taken just below the water surface in 30 feet of water. So the vessel is sitting proud and has been sitting there for 162 years. So Sir John Franklin's last expedition, the Erebus and Terror, the combined crew was 129 men. They departed England May 19th, 1845. Franklin died June 11th, 1847. The ships were abandoned April 22nd, 1848 in Victoria Strait. There was very little contact once the Franklin expeditions left port. They had met some Inuit, and they also met two sailing the Norwegian vessels, whaler vessels. That was their last contact with people from the Western world. Lieutenant Hobson and his men opened the cairn near Victoria Point, King William Island, containing the only written record of Franklin's expedition's fate. This is an image of that document. That document mentioned that Franklin's men were trapped in the ice for about a year and a half, and that the men had moved on to find their way down to Chantry Inlet, where they knew Franklin had some documentation and further exploration. So they were on the move for about a year and a half, exploring King William Island. It's not too sure if they had remanned the ships or not, but Inuit tradition mentions that where the location near where Erebus is found now, that the masts did have sails on them. that there was people on board that they had long teeth, meaning that they were suffering from scurvy and maybe some other disease. There was bodies on board. They had found dishes and other types of material scattered around on the deck. So the Inuit tradition is really important to the discovery of Franklin's ships and also especially Erebus. Schwadka, during his expeditions in search for Franklin, he came across an Inuit. His name is Inuk Puzujuk. I'm maybe hashing that a little bit. But he came up with a drawing that depicts King William Island and islands in the southern Queen Maud Gulf that if by traveling us the way the hunter would from island to island, that if he got to number 10, the 10th island, that is where the Franklin ship was. They didn't know if it was Erebus, but that oral tradition is very, very accurate, and it is proving itself as the archaeologists look into this discovery. With every artifact they find, Inuit testimony comes back again holding true. This is Louis Comacock on the site of Erebus this summer. I had an opportunity to talk to him the day before. He flew by helicopter to land near the wreck site, and also to go on board the research vessel Martin Bergman. Louis Comacock is an Inuit historian who's dedicated his life to searching for answers regarding the history of his people, but also the influence of Western people, European people, especially the Franklin expedition. So Louis, when I was talking to him, he opened up and he mentioned to me, he said, "Adrian, what if I go to the site and I can't stand? What if I break down into tears? What do I do?" And I mentioned, well, we have two captains. You're going to have each one on either side of you, and they're going to hold you up, because that's what captains do. We support each other. And he had a tear in his eye, because for him, he was thinking that the Franklin expedition, when we found the Erebus, the search was gone. It was done. But in reality, it's just begun. So he did an offering, a peace offering. There was some ashes from elders that he spread over the site. And for about a month after this ceremony, there was perfect weather. The weather was calm, which is very rare in the Arctic. Winds were like 10 knots and lower. The water was crystal clear, like being in the south. Louis Comacock had meaning to his research, finding identity to himself, but also the people. The bell of the Erebus also has meaning. As many of you know, the bell is the heart and soul of a vessel. Parks Canada, when the discovery was made, they had found the bell almost right away, and they decided to bring that bell up. For one, to make sure that no one else took the bell, but also they had to identify if it was Erebus or Terror. And they were hoping that if inside or on the outside they would find the writing of the ship. But the bell actually didn't have any writing at all. And in history, vessels, captains, and crew members would often put their children's names on the inside of the bell, or loved ones, to bring meaning, and also a way to, a symbol for the bell to bring them home. I hope you can see that image, but this is another image of a shipwreck just taken with a camera just below the surface of the water. So this year the shipwreck was, the conditions were unbelievably clear. At times the water almost allowed the shipwreck to levitate out of the water because of the complete calmness. So you could also get a sense of the scale. There's, you can see there's 2 divers, Parks Canada divers, just to the bow and up on top of the upper deck. So the shipwreck is in remarkably good shape. It's standing proud in 30 feet of water. The hull, everything is in really good shape. So this is just taken, there's a lot of kelp and growth on the deck. The archaeologists, Parks Canada's team here are starting to remove the kelp so they can get a better picture of the shipwreck. Here's another example of the scale. So this is the bow of the ship. So again, remarkably, it's in really good shape. The preservation of artifacts in the Arctic is none like any other place in the world. There's very little bacteria. The water is cold. It's about 2 degrees to 3 degrees during the summer and up to -2 in the winter. And in this image here, you can actually see all the copper tacks that were used to, originally this vessel was used to go south, and they would clad the hull with copper sheeting to protect it from warm water, I'll call them boat parasites, but barnacles and other things that attach themselves to the boat and actually deteriorate the wood. So they removed that plating for the Arctic because they knew they didn't need it. But they still left, you could still see the copper tacks. So here's a good example of oral history testimony. They found iron chains and anchors on deck, and spoons, knives, forks, tin plates, china plates, etc. When the ship finally sank, her mast stuck out of the water, and many things floated on shore, which natives picked up. He also saw books on board the ship, but the natives did not take them. He afterwards saw some that had washed ashore. He never saw any stone monument or cairn on the mainland near where the ship sank. There was one small boat hanging from the davits, which the natives cut down. Some of the ship's sails were set. I've taken it personally when I'm in the Arctic to speak to the local people. I talk to them about weather. I talk about what their impressions are when the ice forms. If it's going to be early this year or late this year. They will tell me stories about the way the animals travel from the south to the north. Even looking at the plants will start turning early. So it's not much different than we hear in the south, but in the Arctic, every little clue you have to hang on because there's so little there. So the artifacts on the shipwreck are numerous. Here's a plate just on the deck. There's very little sediment around the deck, around the ship as well. You can actually see the wood grain in the vessel on the wood floor planks. So here's an image of the archaeologists taking measurements. Everything is recorded almost like a forensic study. So there's a datum line set. Every artifact is measured against that datum. They take photos, a lot of drawings. So all of this could not be possible without teamwork. So the Franklin expedition is made up of many team members. Since 2008, the Coast Guard vessel, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, was one of the main vessels all the way till present. The Martin Bergman was brought in 2012 and continued to 2015. The Royal Canadian Navy has been a major player, and actually have been a major player for crew members on our vessel. So for the past 3 years, we've had 2 to 3 Navy crew members on board, from cooks to engineers, dive specialists. We also have the One Oceans Voyager that helped with the search in the northern area last year. Here's another, I like this photo because it's a sense of scale. The Martin Bergman is a small vessel. It's 62 feet, but we are a workhorse. We often will help support the Coast Guard vessel, bring them food, and they will give us water at times and refueling. But here's the difference, and what Arctic Research Foundation is really trying to push is that we want to promote small vessels in the Arctic. And the reason for that is that the costs to run a vessel are a lot lower than a large vessel. We can do just as much work as the Coast Guard vessel. The only thing that we have to be careful is about the weather, the wind. We have faced 30-foot waves, 5-meter waves in the past, and this fall, around September 17th, the actual dive site where our vessel is located faced 5-meter waves. The waves rolled in from the north and actually moved the timbers of the shipwreck. 162 years later, this vessel's sitting there, but it's still, you think it's safe, it's underwater, but it's not. These waves were pounding it, and the archaeologists had documented where all the artifacts that they wanted to bring up for our final dive. So we had to sit out this 5-day storm. When we came back, the water went from 40 feet, 30 feet visibility to 0. You couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. The artifacts all moved. So they were not on the deck where they should have been. Some of them had moved down onto the sediment, the seabed floor. Some of them just disappeared. So archaeologists had to set lines to the dive site and work blind to try and find the work that they documented just a week before. So here's a chart, a map that shows the area covered. Since 2008, Parks Canada has worked on the Franklin expeditions. They started off small with about a week to 2 weeks, starting in 2008. In 2012, Arctic Research Foundation came in and offered 6 weeks availability of sea time through the platform RV Martin Bergman. And since 2012, we've been able to really ramp up our search to the point where that little vessel, the RV Martin Bergman, had covered 80% of the area covered. So in the green area, there's 2 areas. There's the northern search area in Victoria Strait and the southern search area in eastern Queen Maud, just north of O'Reilly Island. The shipwreck Erebus is found northeast of O'Reilly Island, kind of just on the edge of the red box. So in 2014, we were covering so much ground that we actually had to expand and move out of our predicted search zone. And it was through that hard, dedicated work by our crew, working 24 hours a day when the weather was good, to push those boundaries. And it was on the edge of this search area where we found Erebus. So here's a photo of the bridge of the Martin Bergman when we're towing Sidescan. Sidescan and multi-beam was used almost like you would use a combine harvesting a field. We had a systematic grid and we would go just like a farmer, 24 hours a day, covering ground, very methodical, making sure we're moving at the same speed. You could see the computer monitor in the front. That's an image of what the Sidescan sonar produces. And to the right of that is our search pattern computer. So there's jokes. Captain David here would sometimes take a long, well, he had a long stick, and he'd actually poke it at the Parks Canada operator because it's so monotonous that guys would fall asleep as they saw. So they'd poke each other, and same vice versa. If the captain kind of moved off just a few degrees off his path, they'd poke each other. But it was basically 3 years of searching for about 6 weeks at a time. We'd start our search season August 10th and go to September 20th. Once you got into September, that's when the trade winds change and you have heavy weather. And often we would get gale force winds, 100-kilometer-an-hour winds plus. The storm that hit the dive site this past summer, the winds were above 100 kilometers an hour. We were actually stuck a year before in the same area. We were actually stuck out at sea for 5 days. 120-kilometer-hour winds came from the west. We basically built a fetch right across Queen Maud Gulf to O'Reilly Island. And we got to a point where to the north you could see 30-foot waves and higher crashing against the ocean, the shallow islands. We were at anchor. We had ice building on our ship. Our anchor was dragging. The current was so strong, ripping between the islands, that our keel would follow the track of the current, even though the wind was blowing at 90 degrees to us. So the conditions in the Arctic can be extremely treacherous, and then at the same time, 2 days later, it can be dead calm. So we use different types of equipment to search for the Airbus. So here we use Sidescan sonar, 2 different models. We have our Navy dive tech preparing, he was also an ROV operator, preparing one of the fish. And we have Parks Canada, Brian Harris, preparing the other fish. So we tow this equipment from the stern of the Martin Bergman using our A-frame and winch. We had moved hydraulics into the wheelhouse of the ship so that we can control the payout and speed of that cable as we were looking real time at what the fish were showing on the seabed floor. The first year we didn't do that. We had someone operating right at the wheel of the winch, and it took a long time, very painful on a 12-hour shift. The next year we moved the hydraulics and we sped up our production by doubling. So other equipment used, we've used different types of AUVs. The Defence Research of Canada had their sympathetic aperture sonar, which is a combination of side-scan sonar and multi-beam sonar, but at a really, really high ping rate. University of Victoria, they had their side-scan sonar mounted on an AUV, and then a smaller AUV mounted side-scan sonar that Parks Canada owns. So three of these were deployed by Martin Bergman at different stages of their search. So this is where things changed. We were pushing our boundaries, trying to find a clue, one clue to find something that resembled a ship or part of a ship. And it was an opportunity that came up. The Hydrographic Services of Canada had to put a beacon on an island. So they decided to maybe do this on a place they've never been to before. So Doug Stenton from Government of Nunavut, the head land archaeologist, he picked an island, and he went out with his team, helicopter pilot, and his colleague Bob, and they set up this beacon, and the helicopter pilot decided to take a walk along the shore, and it was actually a helicopter pilot that found a cache. A cache is a pile of rocks, and the Inuit would store equipment or food underneath, and he saw the tip of this piece of metal and saw a broad arrow on it, which is a mark of the Navy. So it was this helicopter pilot that changed the direction of our search. The next day, Parks Canada decided to deploy their smaller investigator. It's a vessel designed to do dive as a dive platform. They used the Sidescan sonar, and the second pass, they came across the shipwreck. And this is what they saw. So this is what an image, a Sidescan image produces. And really that black band in the middle is from the surface of the ocean to the seabed floor, and then it splits to the side. And it creates shadows. And it's the shadows that highlight any anomalies on the ocean floor. Here's another image produced by Multibeam. So Hydrographic Services brought in their small vessels, the Kinglet and Gannet, to run multi-beam sonar across the wreck site. And with that, the many pulses of sonar, they were able to reconstruct a 3D image of the shipwreck. Here it's quite remarkable that you can see the upper deck, but also we can notice that there's a lot of ice damage. A sheet of ice at one point or over many years came across and raked across the top of the deck, removing some of the planks. It actually fell or pushed down the stern of the ship where Franklin's cabin would have been. There's also a big bite out of the stern. So divers this year were able to kind of peer in that bite and actually see little glimpses of Franklin's cabin, but also on the upper decks, just below, I guess point right here, in that area there, you can glimpse into other captain's quarters and crew member quarters. There's a lot of artifacts in there that haven't been touched yet. There are evidence, clues that there's still bunks, and also underneath the bunks, that's where the crew stored all their artifacts and their personal effects. So a lot of those things are still intact. So next year and the following years, that's the target area of the archaeologists. They want to go in there and reveal some more clues. So this is an image of the spring dive that the Navy and Operation Nunavut pulled together. So it was a huge Joint Task Force North operation. There was almost 3 weeks of operations on the dive site. The site, the task wasn't easy at all. There were strong winds in April. There was a runway built so that Hercs from the US could land and bring gear. The wind blew away their runway, and it had to be reconstructed. So it was very challenging, but in the end they were able to get quite a few dives. And hopefully you can see this image. Here's an image through underneath the ice, looking up through the triangular hole that the divers cut in the ice. It was quite miraculous when you stood at the top of this hole in the ice. the sun would filter through the ice and reflect back up through the seawater, and you'd have this brilliant blue glow. And looking through just on the surface of the water, you can see the ship perfectly clear. You can spot out artifacts, and really the top of the shipwreck is only about 9 feet below the surface. So it's pretty amazing. In this image, the divers have spotted one of the cannons on the shipwreck. So they're measuring. Here's an image of that cannon being raised through the hole in the ice. Summer operations this year. Parks Canada was able to accomplish 18 days of diving off the Martin Bergman as a dive platform. There was 147 individual dives and 143 hours of underwater time, which is really impressive. So the Martin Bergman was stationed about 100 meters, depending on the weather, 100 meters away from the dive site. And Parks Canada would use a Zodiac to approach the area and dive off from that. The Martin Bergman was at anchor most of the time, but we were worried about the debris field. So could be many artifacts in around the site that we can't see, so we had to keep the ship at a distance. And as we discovered and kind of broke more ground, we were able to bring the Martin Bergman closer to help support the dive team. So this summer, the first week of operations was to clean all the kelp off the deck so that archaeologists can start setting up datum lines and also take photographs. One technique called photogrammetry is multiple thousands and thousands of photographs that are layered upon each other to create a 3D image. So you couldn't do that with all the kelp, so they cleared the kelp. At the same time, there was surveys of biological life. So here the archaeologists are putting up a grid within a grid, and they basically harvest all the animals and wildlife in that grid and document it. What's really interesting to scientists is that here's some, looks like sushi, but it's the Arctic sushi. There's quite a bit of life on this reef, and a lot of this life actually did not come from the Arctic at all. So here we're talking about Franklin's expedition trying to cross the Northwest Passage, but at the same time, it's one of the first times they've introduced new life into the Arctic. I'm just going to ramp through some photos quickly. Here's an image of what's believed to be a leg, table leg for Franklin's cabin. And here's another second leg. Here's an image, a drawing before that ship left. You can see the table. Here's an image actually peeking inside Franklin's cabin. And here's another image. You can actually see one of the rigging actually fell through the deck. Here's the wheel. A shoe that is still supple, the leather can be worn today. Medicine actually in a ceramic jar, and the medicine is still there. A sword handle. I'm not too sure what this is, some kind of scientific device. Here's a crest on a breastplate of a uniform found near Franklin's cabin. And I'm going to leave it at this, probably. Can keep going on, but this is the Martin Bergman on the dive site about a week after the discovery. Again, really bad weather. Coast Guard is docking up to Martin Bergman. Yeah, so this platform is a workhorse in the Arctic, and we're always looking for new partners, new people to work with. We love working with the Navy because we have highly trained staff, and combining with all our different types of crew, you need to be diverse to survive in the Arctic. And you also have to work with each other. You can't be alone. That is something that we learned from the Inuit. They provide and share to each other when you're in need, and when you need help, they are there to provide. And that is something that we're going to keep moving forward as we continue our expeditions. And I'll end it at that. If you have any,
Go ahead.
yeah, if you have any questions, I can hang around a little bit later and we can talk.
Thank you.
Are there going to be any attempts to raise the ship?
That's going to be, we're not even close to looking at that. There's about 5 to 8 years of just forensic studies on the site. Any little artifact, even like the medicine bottle, would provide clues to the health and state of the crew. So they don't want to leave anything out. They're actually going to, if they find mouse excrement, they're going to look into it. If they find any other animal excrement, they're going to look into it because it could lead to clues. So right now, no, there's too much work to do before then.
Is there an equal attempt with this equipment to find the other ship, the Terror?
Yes, so the Martin Bergman was stationed in the South the whole 6 weeks this year, but in the North for about 2 weeks starting end of August. There was a search in the north, and that was led by the Coast Guard vessel Laurier. And on that vessel there was the Kinglet Gannet from Hydrographic Services, small launches, and the Investigator, which is a 42-foot vessel. Yeah. So that will be continuing again next year.
But considering that it's in relatively shallow water, were there any artifacts found in Inuit settlements where you'd find a plate or a list or a crest on it?
Yes.
Was there any kind of debris found that you realized they were working in an area where they had had access to it somewhere in 150 years?
There is a trail of artifacts along King William Island. So the point of abandonment, where at Victory Point, the crew brought a lot of artifacts with them, and they had left them behind as they actually crossed King William Island from west to east and north to south. They actually mapped the whole island. Inuit, did run into Inuit, and they have traded. Near the dive site, there's actually a lot of artifacts that are starting to turn up, and Inuit stories that weren't trusted before are now taken very seriously now.
Funny story there. No, I was just saying, it's a very funny story about artifacts. My father spent many years in the Arctic in the 1920s, and I think it was in Arctic Bay in Baffin Island. He told me as a boy he'd met this very elderly Eskimo who had a locket, and inside the locket was a portrait, a miniature of a lady. And on the back of the locket were what my father assumed could have been Franklin's initials. But, he said, the interesting thing is, no matter how much he bartered, no matter how much he offered, that man would not part with it. And there is the theory that the Eskimos know much more about what happened to those survivors than they ever want to let on.
You are right, and there's many hunters I talked to in Cambridge Bay that have pointed to artifacts, grave sites, and even our crew this summer ventured on an island just to get off the water, and looks like they found an unmarked grave site. That's not typical of Inuit. Actually, they're all around. So now that we have this dive site, this wreck, it's painting another picture, and it's actually, there's a new trail being shown. And then we knew that there was artifacts there, but now we're looking harder and taking the Inuit a lot more seriously.
Is the cost of this, is it being entirely underwritten by Parks Canada, or how is it being funded?
Arctic Research Foundation is run, it's a not-for-profit organization, and it's funded privately. So 80% of that search, in reality, was done privately. They do have their portion, and all the partners pool their resources together to save money. So that's why we're using the Navy, Coast Guard. We're bringing operations together and sharing logistics. And really, Arctic Research Foundation is acting as a catalyst. We're not government. We can move freely, and we can bring different government agencies together to capitalize on our assets. And it's showing just really good results.
This concludes today's webcast. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying thank you for listening. You can keep up with coming events at the RCMI by visiting our website at www.rcmi.org. We hope you'll tune in again, and we hope to see you in person at coming events. Thank you and goodbye.